Hello and welcome, Chris Hooper, to the Business Advisory Show. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm going to go right into it, Chris.
Go for it.
What does business advisory mean? What does business advisory mean to you?
And look, I'm glad you ended with the "to you," because look, I think the definition at the moment is kind of like floating around somewhere in the air. Look, I look at business advisory from I guess an accountant's perspective, and by virtue of that, I think from an accountant's perspective, it is informed decision making. So I feel like accountants, in terms of like where they sit in the business advisory world, is you've got data over here. Yes, financial data is part of that data, but there's a lot of other things that we can measure these days, thanks to computers and the internet. And then you've got business owner or like managing director or CEO or whomever, decision maker over here. And then you've basically got business advisor, half of the time that's going to be an accountant who's basically acting as an intermediary between, business information and decision making, right? And I suppose that's the process of business advisory, as it were. I feel like accountants are like well equipped to actually, service that role, just because they are used to sort of interfacing between, financial data and decisions, and different numbers from different sources. It's still numbers at the end of the day, so yeah, that's my take on it.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, so what's interesting about this question, isn't it, is that it's business advisory is such a big topic, a big beast now, and so too many people are intimidated or overwhelmed for perhaps the wrong reasons. So what about your own company? What does your company do, and how does your company help business advisors?
Okay, so our company is a bit of a chameleon, I guess. It's different things to different people. But, for all intents and purposes, it's a market network for freelance accountants. So there's no shortage of sort of like what I call angry young accountants who are kind of like working for these big tier and mid-tier firms that are kind of like looking at the landscape and going, you know what, I want to go out and do my own thing. I think you, John, having worked with probably thousands of like accountants from sole practitioners to big firms, can appreciate that starting your own accounting firm isn't actually necessarily a straightforward process. So Accodex kind of like fits in there as a network of sole practitioners, and we provide them with all of the technology, the training, the infrastructure, and then also like back office support services. So like HR, like IT, like tech support, marketing, and all of those other things. So you've basically got like a practice out of a box, if you're looking to start up on your own. How that actually helps like accountants as business advisors is really that, as you mentioned before, that this business advisory is a bit of a foreign or obscure sort of concept. Internally through the network, we basically, boil that down, and we do give, these practitioners going out on their own all of the sort of training and tools that they need to actually go out and deliver those services.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I personally believe that the best business advisors have got some legitimate experience in business. Yeah. Yep. And that can be running an accounting firm or, a large bookkeeping firm, but no problem. But to have those actual, let's call it for what it is, maybe a 6-figure ATO liability at some point, payment plan, a minimum of a $500,000 payroll to service, and those sorts of things create a lot of pressure.
Absolutely.
We can't relate to unless we've been under it ourselves.
Oh yeah. Yep.
What's been your most valuable lesson as a business owner?
Look, I think, take a step back for a moment. And I was always told, like growing up by my dad, like never trust an accountant who's not in business for themselves. And like, I guess I can appreciate that. And then also, like you were saying, like, I don't think you're actually really in business until you've gotten to that point where you've had to put like payroll on your personal Amex card or something dumb like that. And I think there's this level of like, I guess, empathy that, business advisors that are in business or have been in business, I guess for themselves, be it through accounting or any other business, that have had that like, putting payroll on the credit card experience. There's this level of empathy, like this kind of knowing that exists between business owners, which I think is, yeah, like, I guess this like brain frequency, or it's this kind of like head nod that you're giving me right now, where it's like, yeah, like, you know, I know what you've gone through, what you're going through, because it's the exact same thing that I have gone through and am going through. And it's like this frequency or brainwave that doesn't sort of, you know, translate outside of the realm of like business owner. So I think that understanding that that's a thing is probably the most valuable thing I've taken away from that.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. In fact, it was something that you and I were actually talking about ever so briefly offline before we kicked off this interview formally, was how's your day going and how's my day going, and all the stuff we've got on our to-do list. That, yes, we've smashed 1,000 things and we've got about another 2,000 still to go, and it's late in the day. So it's, yeah, that's right. That's it. That is the true entrepreneur spirit.
I think it's the feeling that, like, no matter how many things you get done, you're adding things quicker than you can ever finish them, you know? And this whole idea that I suppose business from startup onward is not necessarily a destination, rather it's a process, and it's a never ending process. You know, I was once confronted with the notion or concept of actually selling Accodex, and I was talking about this with a friend last week. And, you know, the conversation was along the lines of, well, then what would I do for the next 40 years? You know, you know, and because for me, it's not a destination. It's kind of like a process of, you know, to a degree, I think, self-actualization, you know, and that's why I'm not really fussed about the to-do list, you know, getting forever longer.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Chris, because one of the things that I teach is that success is really misunderstood. You know, sure, we can have a vision, and I'm a massive advocate for doing that, MVV. But the fact is that the end destination is a misunderstood nirvana as well. And in fact, really, I think success is the opportunity to become the best version of ourselves along the way that we need to be and to become in order to actually achieve the vision.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of like thinking about it. But yeah, I think a lot of people do get sort of preoccupied with the destination. And look, I think you've seen this as well, that they're never happy, right? So you have this vision in your head, you get the destination, you achieve that destination, and then what, you know? And I remember, like, through my practicing, like in accounting, I would see people who would, you know, sell their businesses, then retire. And then there was this huge, like, now what, you know, moment for them. And a lot of them actually like just fell into this slump in depression because like their entire identity was wrapped around with their business and the process, as you were saying. And then they had this kind of like huge identity crisis in their 50s or 60s. And I don't think it needs to be like, there needs to be this definitive final destination. I think you can, you know, wind down, do things on your own terms. If you want to work less hours, work less hours. If you want to take a 6-month holiday, you know, by age 50, you should be able to do that without, you know, breaking a sweat. But there doesn't necessarily need to be this definitive, I'm 65, thus I'm going to retire sort of, you know, concept. I think you're doing that along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It also leads to one of the fears about the whole topic of succession planning in the eyes of the accounting industry. Creates a, you know, like succession planning has got a bad name because it means that it's the end of my career. Well, no. What if it means that you massively upgrade what you do and how you do it, when you do it, and do it on your terms less often, but not become redundant, you know? So
yeah, exactly. Like no one says that you have to like walk away from the practice entirely, right? And like from my perspective, I feel like succession planning can and should be like a 5 to 10 year sort of like process of like winding down. And then I think at the end of that process, you can figure out, well, how much do you want to do and what exactly do you want to do, you know, because you've had that capital realization.
I love Richard Branson's model of succession planning. He doesn't fly his own planes. He doesn't taste his own wines. He doesn't price his own credit cards. And he's got it all going on. He's probably still doing 60 to 75 hours a week on the personal brand.
Yeah, but like, I mean, that's, you know, his prerogative and it's his choice, right? And I think that's what you were coming back to, what you were talking about before, where it's like the process, I guess, not the destination.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
So what about your own leadership, your own personal style and approach to business? That's an open-ended question.
Yeah.
Take it where you want to go.
Look, I've basically wrapped this through a framework. There's this concept that I first read about in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago called like the strategy palette, which provides a really good sort of framework and a very mathematical framework, like rigid framework for business strategy. And I looked at myself and I looked at what Accodex was doing, and that was like we had basically by default employed like what's called a visionary like strategy. And I think that's pretty consistent with, I guess, where my head's at. In fact, I recall a conversation with my business partner at the time, back when I was in, just public practice with Cirillo Hooper and Company. And this would have been about 3 or 4 years ago. I think back then I would have been about 27. How's my math? And things were good. Like, don't get me wrong, things were great, in fact. And we were running a very successful, high margin accounting practice with like maybe 4 or 5 staff, and life was good, life was comfortable. And I had the conversation with my business partner Marcus, and was like, okay, cool. Well, what are we doing here, right? We're young, we're making good money. Like, is this it? Do we just kind of like chill out and this is what we do for the next 30 or 40 years? Because I've got no objections to that really. Or, do you want to just bank the fact that we are young and, punt it, put it all on black and swing for the fences here? And his attitude was like, hell, we're young, we can absorb the risk, let's swing for the fences. And that was basically when we made the decision to kind of double down, sell the practice and start up Accodex, which for all intents and purposes is like a tech company, and a very expensive tech company at that. And that was because I suppose in my head, and then also from a strategic perspective, was employing that sort of like visionary model. Because I've got 30 or 40 years to do this, and I don't, joke around when I say that, I was put on this planet to change the accounting game forever. It's like, I genuinely feel like that's my purpose in life. And, I've got 40 years to kind of manifest that. And Accodex is obviously just a extension of doing that,
Yeah, well done. And that reminds me of when Thomas Edison had a bit of an upstart of a journalist trying to discredit him in a one-on-one interview. And he said to Edison, how come you've kept going all these years with all these failures in inventing the light bulb? Why didn't you choose to quit along the way? And he said, well, how could I possibly quit when I've found 10,000 ways to fail? I can't fail much more.
Yeah.
It's not far away now.
Yeah.
It's merely an effort, and it's a great conclusion that, success comes to those who persist rather than,
correct,
write off the frustrations as their one-time effort. Yeah.
It's kind of like a sales proposition, is that like, every no gets you one step closer to a yes. And I think there are some people that understand that and some people that don't understand that. And I think the world kind of organizes itself around that. For the accountants that are actually watching or listening to this, one of the questions that I ask in like job interviews is like, who is your accounting idol, right? Because I think that if I was sitting, let's say that I had a band, for example, John, and I needed a new lead guitarist, yeah? I should be and would ask, my prospective guitarist, which musician or guitarist influenced your work the most, right? And I could ask that question, and that guitarist, I wouldn't be able to shut them up, right? They would basically go on for 30 minutes about every single guitarist, every single band and artist that influenced them being a guitarist, right? Yeah. So when I ask which accountant influenced you the most, I would expect, for an accountant who's pretty switched on, to actually have an answer to that. Reality is that most don't, and that's okay too, because it's not the most exciting profession. But I think you should have an answer to that question. And my answer to that question is 2 people, William Deloitte, the founder of, Deloitte, one of the biggest firms in the world, and I would argue like the founder, more or less, of the audit profession, and a guy called Henry Block, of H&R Block notoriety. And if you actually get into the nitty gritty and actually read the stories of some of these guys, like they're just, they're absolute badasses. You know, I remember like William Deloitte, I think he was kind of like forced into retirement, yeah, by the other partners of the firm. Yeah, the firm that he founded, forced into retirement at like age 75 or 76, which is an impressive accomplishment, by the way, when you're born in the mid 1800s, right? Just impressive enough to live that long, yeah? But then like within a year of retiring, the guy just drops dead. And I feel like for him, that was like, okay, cool. Forced into retirement by the partners, probably good reasons to do that, but it's like, cool, mission accomplished, I'm done, yeah? And he probably checked out in, you know, quite a peaceful fashion. And, you know, I think about Henry Block's story and how even though he'd retired, how active he was still involved with the firm sort of after retiring. And there's one story in his biography that every accountant should actually get their hands on about how he was watching, I think it was the Super Bowl, and he saw a H&R Block ad on the Super Bowl and basically just like stormed into corporate to lay it out to the executives about everything that was wrong with that commercial. And this was well after his retirement. So I think, you know, when you're thinking at that level, I guess that's kind of the level that I'm trying to play to as well, you know?
Yeah, that well done. That's a great example. And I know that a lot of accountants aren't aware of this. In fact, that Warren Buffett, one of his top 10 investments for close to a decade was actually for his portfolio on behalf of clients was H&R Block.
Yeah, well, it was a common sense business model that made a lot of sense, especially during the time, right? So Henry Block basically got back from World War II, and he was spending some time, I think, on Harvard's campus, you know, still supporting the Allied Air Force, operation, but obviously from the safety of Harvard University campus. And he was thinking about, well, what are the next 40 years of my life going to look like, you know? And this coincided around, you know, a time when the US government, obviously because of the war, were starting to make taxes much more complicated, right? And I think he saw this opportunity. He was around in the right place at the right time. Yeah. And I mean, this coincides with Malcolm Gladwell's like outliers theory that, yeah, you obviously have to be built in that, you know, born in that right time, in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, that plays a part. But you have to be switched on to actually identify the opportunity in the first place. And look, if you had have gotten in on the ground floor of, you know, H&R Block in its early days, like, of course you would have made a lot of money, because everyone knows that accounting is a highly profitable business and it's a highly scalable business when you get the formula right.
Hello, there it is. That's exactly right. And I guess that's something that is why I personally, we're not there yet, but we'll get there in a moment, invited you back this year because you're delivering a scalable model and a disruptive model that really 99% of the profession really don't yet comprehend, and they need to see it to think about it for themselves. What do you enjoy the least and also the most when it comes to business advisory?
Okay. Look, I mean, the easy answer to that question is like, what do I enjoy the least is like really compliance work. Like I hate it. It's soul destroying, but I mean, that's not advisory. So what do I enjoy the least out of advisory? Like advisory work is probably, I suppose, having to deal with clients that actually aren't following through. I find that incredibly frustrating. You know, I mean, I don't mind getting paid, but like, you know, what I enjoy the most is actually seeing clients getting results. Yeah. But there's a large part of the advisory process that is dependent on the actual owner manager to actually execute things. Yeah. And a lot of the time I feel like just pushing the owner out of the way and like taking the wheel and kind of like doing my thing. But obviously you can't do that. So I think that's probably the most frustrating thing. And I kind of liken it to like buying a gym membership, right? So a lot of people, you know, typically around New Year's, will go, you know, going, oh, I need to get fit, I need to lose some weight or whatever. And they'll go and they'll sign up for a gym membership. And as soon as they've signed up for that gym membership, it's like, oh, good, conscience is clear, right? And then they go pick up some Cheetos and go watch television instead of actually using the gym membership. Yeah, I think you can, you know, draw a similar analogy to engaging a business advisor going like, you know, this year's the year I'm going to like double my profit, right? What do I need to do? I need to engage a business coach, right? Go out, engage a business coach. And then, you know, just like the gym analogy, it's like, cool, mentally done. I'm successful now. And like the reality is, it's like, well, no, you've got to actually put in the work, right? That, you know, signing up for a gym membership or engaging a business coach is not going to just miraculously transform everything within your business, right? So I think watching that is very frustrating, you know. But then obviously on the rewarding side of it is seeing results, and seeing results reflected in hard dollar figures, like, damn, that's satisfying, you know. And basically saying, or like not even saying, seeing that you've delivered more value from a profitability perspective and from a capital, you know, value perspective than they could ever pay you. I think that's like tick, mission accomplished, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. Well said. In terms of the reflective intelligence that we often have with hindsight, gives us 20/20 vision, and if you had your time over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Look, I think hiring decisions is probably the most critical thing that you can, like, hiring decisions make or break businesses, right? You can have the best business, the best product, the best business model in the entire world, right? But with one or two wrong hires, like, that can destroy the entire thing, right? And conversely, like, you can have a very average product and a very average, you know, business model or whatever, but with the right team members, like, that can be like a huge, enormous, you know, success, right? And I think a good analogy, or a simple analogy of this is like Zappos, like the online shoe company, right? Whose founder wrote that book, Delivering Happiness. For all intents and purposes, Zappos is a fairly, like, you know, average, like, you know, whatever business model, right? It's like they sell sneakers, big what, yeah? But the team behind that is what makes that company special, right? And, you know, I think, so hindsight 20/20, I probably would have spent more time, I suppose, like reading up, studying, you know, HR and recruitment and all of that sort of stuff. I would have just read more, I think. And look, I think you can also argue a lot of this is kind of like trial and error, but, you know, those are some really tough lessons to learn the hard way. You know, and if I were giving advice to my son, I would be saying, like, don't learn this the hard way, man, because it's not fun, right?
Yeah, well done. I appreciate that. Now, you and I have still got a few things in train for the big event, which is coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
There'll be some amazing PR that'll hit social media with sort of 21 days running into the event. So that's a week out from now. It's going online slowly now, but I'm keen to have you just give a snippet now, not too much away, but I'm really hoping that you're going to share a little about your business model and your value proposition this year on stage, not as a sales pitch, but as, in fact, as a disruptive model. Because to me, that's what it is. And the great thing about having accountants on stage sharing with accountants is, you know, typically doesn't even feel like selling anyway. So as opposed to, you know, the vendors are out there pitching their products. So without giving it all away, because that's what the big event's all about, but what do you think are one of the critical, you know, unique points of difference about your model, and why talented accountants are, in fact, attracted to it and feeling empowered by it? You know, that we might get more of the detail in the big roadshow coming up.
Well, I kind of planted the seed earlier in this interview talking about William Deloitte and Henry Block, yeah? And you may actually recall from my presentation last year, where I actually illustrated technological change through this waves of innovation theory, right? And basically said that from 2015 onward, we're into a new wave, right? Which I'm still 100% adamant about. Now, when you put the technology aside, yeah, you can actually see social and I suppose cultural revolutions taking place adjacent to those technological changes, right? Because technology drives cultural and workplace change, right? And the obvious example of this is the Industrial Revolution, right? The advent of you know, process efficiency in factories. What that did from a labor force perspective is a lot of people started leaving the farms and going to work in industry, working for factories. factories, right? And we went through all of these cycles in the last sort of 150, 200 years, right? Now, my proposition here is that William Deloitte, he came about at the right time during a certain like wave of innovation, yeah, which was like the the post-industrial sort of era, as a bankruptcy clerk, would you believe, who was basically winding up all of these fraudulent rail companies, okay? And he thought, somebody independent needs to be inspecting the books of these rail companies before they go bankrupt, right? To give the shareholders some confidence that they're not scams, yeah, because a lot of them were. And that was basically the early idea of audit, right? Now, he was not going to do the audits of every single publicly listed rail company in the United Kingdom, right? He couldn't, yeah? So what he needed to do was to take on partners. And that was where, I guess, the basis of that like partnership model that we know today, that we're still using today, that's where that idea was kind of like premised, because William Deloitte could not do all of the audits for these companies, right? So he had to take on partners and he had to train them in his ways, and that's kind of where we are today. Similarly with Henry Block, yeah, he's like, look, people need help with their taxes, right? I can't possibly do all of the United States, tax returns on my own, yeah? I'm going to need to, I guess, employ people or get people on, right? And this is where H&R Block in the accounting world pioneered the business format franchise, right? Which has basically taken retail taxation by storm, yeah? And my belief and hypothesis, and I'm banking my entire livelihood on this, is that, in this post sort of information age, we're going through another labor force shift. And I think that is the networked, I suppose, guild model for accounting, which ironically is actually kind of back to the primitive in terms of like going back to like the 15th century in terms of how professional services get rendered. So that's basically what I'm going to be talking about at the Accountant's Big Day Out in a few weeks. And I'm looking forward to kind of, I guess, sharing my theory with everyone out there, and I guess gauging the reaction in terms of, whether or not I get booed off a stage.
Yeah, and we may even have the tech in place this year to allow the audience to actually
to boo me with microphones.
No, live feedback survey, I reckon, would be
pretty
cool.
Awesome. Yeah, actually doing some surveys would be great for me and my research in terms of getting some feedback for sure.
Yeah, but I think I already know the answer to that, and that will be that the logic that you tend to run with, albeit you might have your own hypotheses and theories about it, you present a terrific case of logic, and I think that's what our audience will really look forward to at the event as well. Well, that's fantastic, Chris. I want to thank you for joining us today. Very exciting time ahead, and it's only a month away now, but of course, by the time it airs, it might be 3 weeks away.
Yeah.
For the Business Advisory Show, but I look forward to seeing you with Accountant's Big Day Out, and the very exciting story that is Accodex and where you're going in the future. Watch this space, audience. It's pretty cool stuff. Thanks again, Chris. I've enjoyed your time.
Cheers, John. Appreciate it.